Okay, following up on the previous video that I did, there's basically the first question when you're participating in any sport should be, why am I doing it? Obviously, if you're new to any sport, like if you're just getting into it, then the question is pretty simple. It's kind of like, because I want to have fun. If you're getting into it from like a competitive background and it's just a change of pace, and it's something that's more likely that it's going to pay off, it might be a bit different. But for most people, the answer is going to be because you want to have fun. Now, that is the, generally speaking, the most important factor, and it's the easiest metric to kind of value yourself off of on a daily basis when you're performing any sport, rowing included. Uh, you can step back at any point in time and say, okay, am I having fun? Yes or no. Something beyond that would be to say, okay, so why am I having fun? Because fundamentally speaking, after you get in a sport, you need to figure out, to some extent, why it is you value it. You can just enjoy it for, like, without thinking about what you're doing for a decent amount of time. And that's not to say it'll do you a disservice, but it also kind of limits you from being able to maximize fun in a way, right? If you were to make that a form of capital, to speak. So once you've isolated what it is that is most valuable, you can kind of start building a reinforcement plan in some manner of speaking. Basically, you don't have to write this on paper, but if you were to take, if you were to make a chart on paper that said, let's say, okay, when I was a junior, and junior C, I did it like 80% for the social aspect, and 20% of it was probably for the fact that I just enjoyed being on the water and moving a craft. You know, I came from my water sports background was in sailing, so I liked being able to be like a master of my craft, like master commander sort of thing, right? And that was the minority part. The most part of it was like I was a social outcast with very few friends, so this was a way to like belong. And it's not to say I didn't have a lot of people on what was the Royal Oak team at the time that were like really mean. It's just not very nice. But I kind of like the inclusion aspect, even if it was just like in a team, as well as that 20% kept me in it enough to want to try it further. And with VCRC, when I came into it, the environment off like the rebuild from 2005 basically was hyper inclusive. It just made everyone want to belong. It was a really solid group of people. Not necessarily the strongest group. It was pretty like soft, if you want to call it that. But they were also very welcoming, and that is probably what kept me in the sport for probably the first 2 years. You know, that was like 80% for the first year. Probably in the second year, in first year junior B, it was less, but I had kind of continued to meet that social inclusion aspect. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have continued in sport. Plain and simple. And that's a really good way to look at it, right? If you look at it like, okay, so what do I value about the sport? And that allows you to kind of not just go through it and kind of be passive in what you're doing, but also like consider why you're in it. That is really important moving forward. If you want to think about this in like structural terms, like moving forward after club in high school, a lot of people quit. Most of the guys, like if not all of them, that I rode as a junior in Big City they don't row anymore. Plain and simple. And a lot of that's just the community. Like, not having community is tough. From a structural point, joining a bunch of old people and seniors and waking up at 5:30 isn't on, right? And there isn't really anything to fill in the gap, which is something I'm working on, but I don't really have a prototype that's feasible just yet. At any rate, why you row, why you train, why you compete, why you participate in sport will change as you spend more time doing it, right? Basically, over time, my interest and my reasons for interest really changed. I started off in it just, like I said, the social aspect with a little bit of liking the craft aspect. And when I was in grade 9, I started wanting to do it a bit more because it made me feel fit, which was really weird because I was tiny. I was like 5'2" when I was 15, and I was just tiny. So doing that was like, in some ways, reassuring, you know. And by that, plus like the social factors, which were all were steadfast. But because I didn't need them to be, because I didn't need more because I had enough, other things came into it. So I did a bit more for that part. I liked competing. It wasn't why I did it. I wasn't competitive in the sense that I would be training to compete. I would be training just to have fun, and I would be racing just to have fun, which is important to isolate. In grade 10, that started to change. I started to want to compete to belong, because in my grade 9 year, a bunch of people who I kind of were somewhat friends with started to move up because they started to do it because they wanted to be good. And I didn't necessarily want to be good, but in the following fall, so in grade 10, they were good, and I to some extent, I didn't want to row with people who weren't technically good because I was technically okay at that point in time, or at least I thought so, and I was a little bit arrogant in that, and I just didn't want, I wanted to row with faster people. I wanted to get faster. I wanted to reach, not my potential, so that wasn't it at the point in time. I just wanted to reach higher. And it wasn't aiming for like a goal. It was really like, my friends were here. My friends were like at this mark, and I wanted to row with them and not the people who I thought sucked. And, you know, childish thing to say. I was a kid. I still am. Right? So that changed that. I didn't have to worry about the social aspect, although that was still dragging me forward. And I basically wanted to be up there. So my priorities changed to try and suit, in some ways, the social aspect. The craft and like the technique, I always kind of stayed there as like a chunk. But I would say grade 9 was probably somewhere around 60-40, no, I would say 60-20-20, or 60-25-15, right? That sort of split. And then grade 10, like being good, like not just fit, but like physically competitive and proficient in my sport competitively, became a 20. So it took a chunk out of the social, let's say. Or a better way to think about it would be that the social kind of blended in a little bit, so a little bit of it took out from, let's say, the boat moving part and the fitness part, right? In some ways it melded, so it's an amalgamation of the two, but there was an extra, like, say 10% that was not there before. Moving forward, after trying that out, and I guess being frustrated by a lack of success, so I made boats and stuff, but after key events, it wasn't unpacked in a way that I guess I was fond of. And I couldn't really go back at that point in time, right? Like once you get somewhere, it's hard to change to go back, particularly if it's in your mind. So the only real choice in my mind was to move forward because I wanted to become better. And the social aspect in some ways became a little less important then. And I kind of threw myself up against the wall a lot, and got injured because of it. But I also got, in some ways, faster because of it. Weird, like retrospectively, I got somewhat obsessed with trying to become great, and I got mono in like February of grade 11. So my priorities were to get better then. But I guess coming back in the sport, I was somewhat obsessed then. It wasn't really that healthy, to be honest. And I ended up having to, like, in some ways ditch that dream. Like I didn't even make a Henley crew. In some ways it was because some guy from Brentwood wanted to spend the summer with his girlfriend, but a boat didn't get sent. And at that point in time, the guys who were kind of like leading in front of me, because with Fig City, the 2 years, going into grade 12, I didn't have anyone to chase anymore. I didn't really have goals anymore, and it was a tough time for me emotionally, not just due to that. So I kind of became put on the back burner to some extent. I still was in the sport, and I was getting better relative to people, but I wasn't really trying to achieve much. In some ways, I wasn't trying to achieve that much when I was in grade 11 either. I was just trying to beat people and move up, because it was kind of ingrained in me that way. Like the Sprackman idea for training is inter-squad competition, right? You're trying to beat your buddy, because that'll put you in the boat. Every day is a sea race, essentially. So that mentality really made me, in a way, not really appreciate the sport in the way that I should have, which is a good example. It left me with a bit of a sour taste moving forward. Stepping back for that a little bit, and talking about tools. I mean, you have your charts, and even if you just go through it on your own and just think about kind of how you've been involved in the sport, it's a good way of figuring out what's important to you. And that is the primary function. Like, you don't want to prevent yourself from enjoying the sport and being part of it in different ways, but you also want to identify what matters to you the most, right? Fundamentally, that is the key premise for this video. If you can start off and identify why you want to row, and not lie to yourself in order to make that happen. Like if you take a decent amount of time and come out of it with like a solid answer, even if it's like I'm half in one camp, half in the other. From here, we can work on a plan to make that happen, right? Nothing's going to happen overnight. It's not supposed to, but starting off this way will enable you to get a better foundation for moving forward.